Beloved, please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts together be acceptable and pleasing in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. To say that the events of the past 2 weeks have been stressful is the understatement of the century. The general election of 2020 will go down in history as arguably one of the most consequential in our nation's history. Undoubtedly, there will be the oft-mentioned narrative about a divided country, and there have and will be comparisons to the elections of 1860 and 1968, both held in times of great division, the first on the eve of the Civil War, and the second during a year that saw the murders of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, along with extraordinary civil unrest. Like then, there will also be an impulse to shift to cloying sentiment about reconciliation and healing, which is quite understandable given what has felt like a perpetual pressure cooker these past 4 years. And yet, beloved, for all the talk of coming together, there is an undeniable fact that haunts me even as I breathe a collective sigh of relief. And it's this: that 72 million Americans and counting, a majority of them white, supported a candidate who has been unapologetically racist, sexist, ableist, a candidate whose breathtaking incompetence and lack of leadership has led to the mushrooming of a pandemic that has left nearly 250,000 souls and counting perished in his wake. 72 million. Beloved, that is not a lunatic fringe, and it should disturb us all, because it points to the depth and the breadth of the challenges facing us as a nation. Consider this exchange in a tweet where the author quotes his neighbor who says, "We need to bring this country together." And the author's response is, "You can start by telling your acquaintances to stop calling 71 plus million Americans racists, bigots, and Nazis." The point? Let's forget about all the rancor and the insanity of the past 4 years and kiss and make up. To that I say, not so fast. Black queer American author and prophet James Baldwin is instructive here when he stated pointedly that we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. Let me repeat. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. As a Black queer American proudly part of Baldwin's prophetic lineage, I add my voice to his and exclaim that reconciliation without justice is no reconciliation at all. It's given us Jim Crow, it's given us the school-to-prison pipeline, voter suppression, redlining, and on and on and on. In other words, reconciliation and its fraternal twin, forgiveness, have often been tools of white supremacy, short-circuiting the true reckoning of the horrors and atrocities, resulting in a kind of cheap grace, complete with a shallow capacity, unable to do the hard work of justice. Reconciliation in this way is sentimentality when what is called for is an unflinching, unsentimental assessment. From this perspective, we should conclude that irreconcilable differences, in fact, are a fuel rather than an impediment to equity. Rather than seeing such differences as a failure, they are, in fact, necessary. That the discomfort is essential, and that it is our cross to bear. We have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, which runs counter to what many of us have been led to believe. Moreover, I submit to you, beloved ones, that irreconcilability is not unique to our nation. It is also part of the fabric of our faith itself. Today's scriptural readings provide a powerful example of what are essentially two diametrically opposed ideas: freedom and enslavement. There's Israel's story of the Exodus, God's liberating enslaved Hebrews from bondage in Egypt on the one hand, and Paul's letters to the Ephesians, where he exhorts slaves to be obedient to their enslavers on the other. What on earth is going on here? How can we go from the foundational experience of liberation to a reinscription of enslavement? What about the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice? What about upward progress? Over the past several weeks, I've led a discussion group using Peter Enns' book, How the Bible Actually Works. His thesis is simple. The Bible is ancient, ambiguous, and diverse. He says that 8 million different ways. In it, he provides numerous examples of how the Bible contradicts itself, not as a way to delegitimize it, but rather as a way to help us understand that the contradictory nature is the story of a people who wrestled with what their faith meant to them in their historical context. And this is why I've likened the Bible to a fruitcake, because I have come to understand that reconciliation isn't the point, but rather that wisdom and all the various bits that create the whole recipe of history. Each generation must wrestle anew with meaning. That is our divine calling and responsibility. Which brings us back to the questions I posed about Exodus and Ephesians, and ultimately about our nation. What I submit to you is that these cannot, should not be reconciled, and that, like the fruitcake with its nutty and sweet and incomprehensible bits, our tradition and nature are often contradictory entities. It means things like this: that no amount of apologetics can bridge the chasm between let my people go and slaves obey your masters. That bridge is too far, as some have argued, and created the permanent chasm between Christianity and Judaism. It means that ours is a nation in which black soldiers fought and died in global conflicts to liberate others abroad, only to return home and continue to find their liberation denied. It means that we could elect both Barack Obama and Donald Trump. It means that ours is a tradition that could extol universal love and be responsible for the anti-Semitism that has led to the deaths of millions of our Jewish siblings. It means that ours is a tradition that has both liberated and enslaved. Sobering, isn't it? Unsettling, isn't it? Maddening, isn't it? Beloved, this is who we are. Sit with that. 72 million souls in our nation, a majority of them white, many of whom call themselves Christian, have a radically different view of what a civil society should look like. One that is frankly infected with the cruel legacies of enslavement and white supremacy. It's a society without a meaningful social contract, one in which the basics like healthcare and education and retirement are non-existent, all out of a fear that the shiftless Black, the undocumented Latinx, the morally perverse queer will get what only straight white folks rightly deserve. What will the future bring? We do not know. My sense, though, is that we'll have rough times ahead. For if past is prelude, we know that 1860 led to the Civil War, and that 1968 led to a deepening of white racial resentment and grievance, and the rise of the so-called Southern strategy. I fear a further radicalization of whiteness, specifically among young white men, who are a kind of American Taliban, every bit as lethal, regressive, and murderous. Or we may still yet see the dissolution of the Union in favor of a smaller confederation of states along regional and cultural lines. Yikes is right. So all of this begs the important, necessary question. Where then is hope to be found? Perhaps that not all 72 million are fully enrolled in a white supremacist agenda and can be changed. Or, and this is where I land, that the 77 million who saw another vision will continue on that messy journey of reckoning, of love over fear, of justice over oppression, a restless peace where the struggle itself brings about the true repair of breaches we so desperately long for. This, beloved, I believe with all of my heart and my soul and my might, is the engine for the moral arc of the universe bending towards justice in the face of all that stands against it. Nothing less will do. The birth of God's realm waits for us.